I'll share my personal testimony with you in two parts. And these two parts are interconnected. So I'm going to start in the morning and in this morning session, and I'm going to go through the facts. It's going to be mostly read. And the afternoon part, I'm going to unpack the meaning of my life journey, and I'm going to actually finish the personal testimony. So it would be good, if possible, to bear with me and to attend the afternoon session as well. And I would like to start with a passage from the Bible first. I'm going to begin in Exodus 14, verses 5 to 20. You've got the passage up there. I don't know if it's big. Yeah, it is big enough. You can read it. But if not, you can also refer to your Bibles. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the mind of Pharaoh and his servants was changed towards the people, and they said, "What is this that we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us?" So he made ready his chariot and took his army with him, and took 600 picked chariots and all of the other chariots of Egypt, with officers all over them. And the Lord hardened the heart of the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and he pursued the people of Israel as they went forth defiantly. The Egyptians pursued them, and all the Pharaoh horses and chariots, and all his horsemen and his army, and overtook them encamped by the sea, by the Pillar Rock in front of Baal-zephon. When the Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them. And they were in great fear. They were in what? In great fear. Thank you. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone and let us serve the Egyptians, for it would be better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." And Moses said to the people, "Fear not, stand firm, and see that the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you only have to be still." The Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry to me? Tell the people to go forward, lift up the rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go on dry ground through the sea. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so that they will go in after them. And I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his hosts, his chariots and his horsemen. And the Egyptian shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gotten glory over Pharaoh, his chariots and his horsemen." Then the angel of God, who went before the host of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them. Because this is what God does. Sometimes he walks behind us, and when he sees that time is required, he moves ahead of us. He's always there in different circumstances. Today I want to talk to you about fear. And this is perhaps the most difficult thing I had to learn in my life, and I am still learning as we speak. Getting rid of the fear in my life. And I'm going to draw a correction between fear and mental health, and share with you how God healed me from depression initially, and later from a severe anxiety. I was born in Romania in 1985. Romania is an Eastern European country which gained its independence from communism in 1989, a revolution which took place in my birth city. And having grown up overseas from the age of 17 in a non-capitalist country has shaped my culture, has shaped my thinking, the social norms, and also this factored in the way that God was presented to me by my church and by my mother. And the view of God I grew up with, I have only later discovered in life that it impacted my ministry and my overall involvement for God. You see, I was doing a lot of good deeds. I was involved in a youth ministry program. I had my own ministry running. I was going to all the right conferences. I was an obedient and compliant daughter. I was working. I was studying. I was waking up at 5 a.m. to do my devotion and prayer before going to work. I was. And yet, years later, I realized that I was missing the most important thing in my life, which was trust and faith in Jesus Christ. These are some images of the revolution that happened in 1989 in my birth city. I thought I was in a pretty good stand spiritually until one day, events out of my control tested me so my faith can be refined, so I can finally start to walk on water. I had a beautiful childhood, and the country I grew up shaped me in the person I am today, despite being raised by a single mother who did everything in her power to provide for me in terms of education, entertainment, and above all, a Christian education. My mom was hard with my discipline and always kept me busy with activities because I was told I was a strong-willed child. And now I am dealing with my own strong-willed child. However, unlike my mother, who was a single mom, I have a husband and a partner who supports me in every aspect of my life. And that is truly a blessing I'm not taking for granted. Generally, children who grow up overseas have a deeper and closer relationship with their grandparents. I had a fantastic relationship with them and loved my grandparents very much. I would spend all my summer holidays on my grandparents' farm, which was to the south of the country. My maternal grandmother and grandfather were the only Adventists in town and the founders of the first Adventist church in this place. It was a poor town, a poor country town. And I remember how much my grandmother worked to raise funds to build that church. She would pave the alley leading to the church with beautiful trees and flowers who would come up every spring and summer. Friday she would go to clean the church, and I remember her enthusiasm for God like it was yesterday. And it was during these summer nights that my grandmother was reading me Bible stories. And I was told I refused to go to sleep until she took a picture of Jesus that had up the wall, and I would hug this picture and I would go to sleep. My grandmother played a significant role into laying the foundation of Jesus' love and instilling Jesus' love in my heart. But my grandmother had an interesting way of keeping under control because I was a wildly creative child who didn't leave any stones unturned. So she would often tell me, when I misbehave, that godchildren do not behave this way. And Mom would finish it off by saying, don't disappoint God, because God will withdraw His blessing and will not be able to fulfill the plan He has in your life. Can you see what is wrong with this type of thinking? So I grew up, to some extent, fearing God instead of loving God. I completed my primary school years in a local community school. It was a very good school in terms of the education and resources available to teachers. However, it was a merit-based school where preferential treatment was given to children who came from families with high-ranking officials or high-paid professionals with a reputation in time. I was neither from a family of high-income earners, not professionals. Actually, my grandmother was a teacher at that school, and she leveraged her influence to get me enrolled in this elite class. And whilst this class was best at schooling, it was not the best environment for my emotional development. The experiences I had in this class with teachers and students would leave me marked with insecurities, which would emerge much later in life when I would be placed in situations outside my control. In fact, I remember that one day my mother was pulled aside by my teacher, and she was told that she predicts that I will fall in love very early in life and I will not achieve anything professionally. This opinion she formed on the basis that I was with my head in the clouds, only interested in history, visual arts, playing with boys, not being good at math, and not really excelling at my grades. This was just in one long list of predictions she has made about me in these 4 years. But what she in fact failed to acknowledge is that I was a child of God. And this was much more important. And God had a plan for me even before I was born. Now, I can only begin to imagine what my mother must have felt when my teacher gave a prediction. Back then, there was also an assumption that if you come from a broken family, and if your father is an alcoholic, which my father was, that you're not going to achieve much in life. Now, my teacher's predictions and assumptions made things worse for me at home, because as a result, my mom sought an arsenal of private tutors, language and music tutors, and I would stay to study for hours, including on Sunday, to prove my teacher wrong. My most favorite day of the week would become Friday night and Saturday, because due to Sabbath observance, my mother couldn't technically make me do any work. And let me tell you that whilst I was a girl who was raised by a single mother who didn't quite measure to the social norms of the time, I had the advantage of knowing God and being a child of God. And this God was the God who is going to train me and prepare me for the work He had assigned for me 20 years later. Now we started reading with a passage about Moses. For Moses to get up to crossing the Red Sea and to be able to open the Red Sea in two, he had to go to a prior 80 years of training. And when God selected Moses, He didn't select Moses on the basis of who he was, on the family he was coming from, on his origin. Quite the opposite. He was a Jew. He was an undesirable. He was a minority in a majority country where Egyptians were the rulers. But Moses was selected based on his parents' faith for him. And this is something I am going to unpack further this afternoon. Coming back to my testimony is that after 4 years of primary school, I went to a secondary school. And my mother felt inspired to transfer me at this school because this school taught English. Not many schools taught English at that time in Romania. French and Russian was the preferred language, but this school taught English. And she somehow felt inspired that one day I'm going to need a language. And she was right. I was to migrate to Australia in 2003, and the foundation of English, the basic language skills, I would have needed them back then. Now, this was again another good school, but I wasn't done with my teacher's predictions about me. It was around this time that I started showing interest in creative writing, and I started to develop in this space. And I would often write creative essays and poems and try to enter the various competitions that were at that time in school. But my literature teacher was my fierce opponent, and at some point she got tired of me applying and submitting essays for the competition, so she called my mom to school and she said to my mom that I should quit because I don't have any language ability, I have no talent, and she's not going any longer to receive my applications. Now, I would have not known at the time, and my teacher would have not known, that several years later after this, I would publish my own book. And that this book was going to be used by God to witness in a school of another denomination. From this secondary school, I was preparing to start high school. However, the influences of my church friends started to derail me. Now listen careful to this. I was very involved with the youth in my church. I was singing in the choir, I was going to camporees. However, the youth group I was in started doing things that weren't godly. And they had a great bearing and influence on me to the extent that they started to derail me. And this happened around the time I was applying to get into high school. And through a set of circumstances, I couldn't secure any high school spots in the town that I was. Now, my grandmother, in her desperation that I don't leave town to go to another high school in another town, leveraged again her power and connection in the education sector to get me into a high school, which was a prestigious high school. Because you see, the society I'm coming out of, it's all based around prestige and grades and diplomas. And my grandmother couldn't accept that a granddaughter of hers could not achieve academically. So she went and spoke to the director of the school and tried to get me enrolled. And the director, upon hearing that I am Adventist, he said to her that no child of Adventist is going to ever set foot in her school. She said that he doesn't have children from any of the small denominations. He doesn't agree with them, he doesn't like them, and he will never accept me in that school. A few months later, the director's only child committed suicide, and it was all over the papers. And my grandmother came to bring in the news. Now, I think that this goes on to highlight the extent of mental health issues that existed at the time. This man rejected God, but this man was a man who was struggling, whose own family was struggling. In the end, I ended up in a Christian high school in another town. Regardless of how much my mother opposed this move, God approved this move. And I had to go there, I had to pack up my bags and go there, and this will be the most beautiful year of my life. This is where my relationship with God took a completely different turn. And under the care of my chaplain, my choir leader, and teachers, I started reading Christian literature and penetrating deeper and deeper in my relationship with God. However, all good things come to an end. By the end of the first year in my school, an event was about to happen which was going to put me in a really vulnerable position. And begin the start of my witnessing career, so to speak. This incident had to do with the integrity of some of the most senior staff on the institution coming into question when rumors started circulating among students that material aids received from overseas and destined for the most impoverished students residing at the school have been misappropriated by the school most senior of staff. It happened that I was sharing a dorm room with some of the students whose parents had limited financial needs and who were most impacted by the circumstances. And without malintent, I commented on these rumors with someone. And that someone went ahead and put a complaint with the head of the institution. And after many, many investigations, it all came down boiling to me that I was the one who started the rumor. My mother, seeing what was about to happen, pulled my file to transfer me back in town, so to move me back in my birth town. But my file was blocked by the head of the institution, who was the main culprit and who was involved in the whole incident. And you can only imagine how things started to go down from here. Family and friends had to intervene on my behalf to get my transfer file, my academic file released. My mom went in person 5 hours by train to reason with this person. And the answer was no. We cannot hurt her, but we're not going to release her file. And if she doesn't turn up to school, she's going to lose the year. My mom decided to keep me home, and I could see children going to school every morning. And the first trimester was drawing into a close. There were only a month left. Now the problem was that if my file came, there was no school willing to accept me coming in at the end of the term, and I had to repeat it. However, God, through His provision, impressed the mind of the director from the Baptist high school in time, and he accepted my file. I only had a few weeks to catch up on the studies, and I managed to catch up on studies and finish second in my class. I was the only Adventist and Sabbath keeper in there, and I was a curiosity to the teacher. The director has given special instruction to the theology teachers not to pick on me, not to engage in any theological conversation, and not to antagonize beliefs. However, this was a high-performing school, and again, grades was important to them, and they value students who studied hard and scored hard. And I believe that a way of God for getting to them and getting their attention was to help me catch up on the whole trimester in just 1 month and score high. This was not my doing. This was Him helping me, because remember, I stumbled when I started school. I was falling behind. I couldn't possibly get from there to there without God's help. It was also around this time that I published my book. And this was a book that they invited me. It was a book about God. There were poems and essays about God. And they invited me to promote this book amongst their churches. And I was amazed myself about this book, because I was writing it. Ideas and inspiration was pouring in my head, and I didn't know where this came from. I wrote it in a very short, concentrated time. And I knew back then that I was just a vessel, and this God was using this opportunity for me to witness for Him. And let me tell you something else. All those feelings of insecurity that my teachers have cultivated over the years dissipated somehow with this book. Because God is good. God wanted to reaffirm me that I'm not quite the way that I was projected to be. Now in 2003, right after finishing year 11, we left for Australia and we landed in Sydney. Little did I know that this change was going to greatly impact my mental faith, and I was going to face the 15 most challenging years of my life. Sorry, I'll have to take a sip of water. I was about to start year 12, just a few months from landing. And English was going to be my biggest challenge. Now, I forgot to tell you that before I left that Baptist high school to migrate to Australia, while I was very well received and looked after in there, I had a teacher. He was another teacher who found any opportunity to humiliate and discourage me, especially in front of the class. And this was my English teacher. And this is really interesting, that all the attacks I was receiving were about language and language skill. And this teacher, just before leaving the school at the goodbye party, pulled me aside and said, I am really worried for you, because you have no aptitude and no skill, and you're going to go to Australia and you'll have to speak in English and live in English, and I have no idea how you're going to do it. And I didn't give it much thought at the time. Her intention was to discourage, and I'm not sure if she realized what she did. But when I was about to enter my year 12 and do my start and enter university as well, her thoughts starting to play on her mind, and I started to feel discouraged. Eventually I graduated uni, I completed postgraduate studies, I finished an internship, I started looking for work, months and years, a year and a half on end. I applied and tried to find work. And in my desperation, I applied to all the government departments I could I could find. See, I finished social sciences, so it was just a natural pathway that I would go and work for government. And I tried for level 3 positions in government. I wouldn't get in, so I said, that's fine, I'm gonna start with 2. So I put admin. I applied to all the admin jobs I could find, including 2 police stations. Now, by this time, I felt exhausted. I felt that everything I had accomplished so far was done with great difficulty and came at a great personal cost, physically and health-wise. However, little did I know that God has started a process of change in me. And little did I know that I had to face yet many, many other challenges. Now, on a Tuesday afternoon, in the last week of December 2011, remember this, it was the last week of the December 2011, I received a call from a local police station inviting me for an interview. And I had mixed emotions because I didn't remember applying to the local police station. And I was happy that I received an interview, but I was highly confused because I've got nothing wrong against police stations, but it was just not the environment I envisioned that I would be working in. The next day, I went for a job interview. And Friday, the 31st of December, remember this Friday, the end of the year, 31st of December, I received a call that I had a job. Now, who advertises a job in December? Who runs interviews in the last week of December? And who does want to take a break and go home on 31st of December? But I prayed that God will give me a job by the end of the year. And God had given me, and for a kid who comes from overseas and who doesn't speak English, this is a big thing. You know, for you might seem like, oh, this is just, you got your first job, you know, working at Macca's. I didn't have the opportunity to have my first job to work at Macca's, so for me this was a big deal. So I started working in a new role as a brief clerk, entering data and filing crime briefs along 30 operational police members in a station by the waterfront. But I had greatly undermined what this role would require and the culture I was about to confront. And while the sworn members, as we call them, the police officer, were really nice to me, the civilian, the only civilian I worked in there, decided that she was going to make my life hard. She was tasked to train me. However, due to personal grudges in her personal life and with the workplace, she decided that she's not going to train me. And she said to me on my first day, I'm only going to tell you things once, and if you don't get it, I am not going to repeat them. Here is the pile of paperwork. You'll have to file them, and the tray will have to be empty by the end of the day. Otherwise, there's going to be trouble. At this point, I was struggling with mental health issues, and I couldn't understand what God would allow a person as fragile as I to work in an environment as brutal as this. However, reflecting back on the circumstances leading to getting this job, I was impressed not to quit, but to press forward. After 5 years, I got tired. I've learned my role. I was tired of the treatment, to be honest. That's all I could last, 1.5 years. And I applied for a job, a role at the police crime headquarters in St. Kilda Road. And as I was preparing for the interview, I had a dream. I dreamed that I took a tram ride down a particular road and I arrived in front of a tall, grey, ugly building. And it was an ugly building. The old police headquarters was an ugly building. Upon entering this building, I was greeted by 2 women. I went up to a staircase, and there I was given a new coat. I didn't pay attention to this dream at the time, but months after I started in this role, I was catching the tram to go back home to catch my train from Flinders Street, from the train station. And at that moment, it clicked. It dawned on me. The dream came back. The building that I dreamed was the building that I was working in, and the tram ride was the tram ride that I was taking. And these two women were the most wonderful women that got appointed to train me in my new role. Now, I have never been to that part of St. Kilda before. And I was getting chills. I had goosebumps as I was taking my ride home. And I was thinking that it was providential, and that whatever adversities might come in the way, God put me in this role. Now, it was around this time. Sorry, I'm going a little bit over time, but I'm asking you to bear with me. I hope it's not boring. No? Keep going? Thank you. Around this time, I was encouraged by my supervisors to become an analyst. But the stakes were very high, and it was very competitive to get in, and people who worked in there for years and years and years couldn't get in. So I applied, and I applied for months. In fact, I applied for years. And at some point, the recruiter, getting fed up with my application, pulled me aside and said to me, look, let's be honest here. There's analysts who are born here, who are native English speakers, and they don't make it through. You are not a native English speaker, and you need the language skill. Analysis, English in analysis, it's the basis of the skill set. You're not going to be able to do it or to cope in the role, so quit applying. So I applied. I stopped applying. The thoughts of my teachers, my English teacher, my literature teacher, all the teachers came back to me. And I decided, that's fine, I'm going to take a project officer role in another department. So I went for a promotion there, and I got the role. And let me tell you something, this was a role that I had to take, because this was a role that was going to teach me things that were at the basis, underline the foundation of my analyst work later down the track. And also this job in the crime headquarters, I had to learn there things that no any other analyst who would have later become an analyst would have been able to know. And I knew these things because God chose an alternate pathway for me. She said, I'm not going to take you straight to the analyst role. You have to start from a local station. You have to learn the ropes. You have to learn the system. So I'm going to take a different pathway with you. In this role, someone decided and started nagging me again. A high-ranking officer nagged me with applying for an analyst job again. And I told him I can't get through. We're not having that conversation. And he said, but two positions, two secondments have come up, 6 months each. There's two roles. You only have to go in, put your application, you can do it for 6 months. And I said, all right, I'm going to throw the application in. I did, and I failed. And I failed right below the line. And two of my closest friends got the two jobs. The recruiting manager came and said, look, I am really sorry. If other positions come, I will let you know. And I felt that God was telling me to apply, and yet I am failing again. What's happening? Why did that person stir me up and get my interest in this line of work again? Now, 1 week later, the same recruiting officer called me and said, look, the job has become available. Do you want it? And I said, but what's happened? Well, one of your colleagues didn't get released from his duties. His boss doesn't want to let him go to do this 6 month secondment, which bumps your application up. Now, knowing how competitive it was to get in and how difficult, I straight away saw God's hand in that. It doesn't happen that a person doesn't get released. It happens rarely that someone is so indispensable in their work that the boss wouldn't let them go to have more experience. Not in the public service. Everyone there encourages you to have experience and apply for secondments and supports you in that. But I knew that this was for me. This was my chance. And I've completed my training. And after 6 months, I started applying for roles. I couldn't get any roles inside. So I applied with agencies, external agencies. And after 6 months, I got a role with an integrity agency in Melbourne. And this marked my 7-year careers in the police force. Now, I didn't want to leave the police force, but God didn't want me to stay. And through a set of circumstances, He was pushing me out. I had to go on through a new challenge and a new project. My new role in this integrity agency was fantastic. In 1.5 years, I've learned more than any other analyst would learn in 3 years. I had a good relationship with my team. I had a good relationship with my boss. We ran many, many projects together. We are close-knit. We were a close team. I worked very hard. And because I worked so hard, I was given my own project. I was assigned, I was trusted. It was uncommon for someone with that little experience to be given a project. And I took it as a learning experience, as an opportunity that God was giving me. And after working sweat and tears 8 months on that project alone, because we were under-resourced, a new project manager was appointed to oversee my project. Now, this project manager had a different view and direction of the project that I had. And my progress reports and analytics and findings greatly antagonized the direction of his project. And I didn't know this, but he had a view of closing down the project, and he couldn't because my progress reports stated otherwise, and the evidence was otherwise. It was getting close to having my performance review, my performance appraisal. Now, I had a dream with 2 weeks before the appraisal. I dreamed that I was called to step into an office by a man and a woman, and that I walked out of there crying, and that the situation was really tense. And I shared this dream with my manager, and she said, "But you don't have anything to worry about because you're high performing. And if there is anyone who knows the legislation and the theory and the practice, that's you. So I don't know why you're afraid." Now, 2 weeks later, as I was sitting at my desk doing my work, I was taken by surprise by the project manager and another female manager, and I was asked to step into a room. And what happened in that room is it was going to give me a long-lasting shock. And potentially this was what's going to officially start my severe anxiety. I was being blamed for the project failure as a way of closing down the project, and the intimidation techniques that were being used against me in that room, they were so sophisticated and I so inexperienced that I walked out of that room crying, and I walked aimlessly down the streets. Now, I forgot to tell you something. I forgot to tell you the most important part. When I came to Australia in 2003, a year after migrating, I started struggling with sleep because I was under intense pressure from school and all the worries, and missing my home, missing my grandparents, missing my things, you know, missing my life. And I started not to sleep at night. And once I fell asleep, I couldn't stay asleep. And in the morning, I would wake up with pains all over my body. And I was in year 12, and I said, this doesn't look good. And I became very teary and irritable, moody and hard to please. And a few months later, I experienced my first panic attack, and I didn't know it was a panic attack. I didn't know what it was, but I was in bed alone in my room, and I had this feeling that came out of nowhere of impending doom. My heart was racing, and I thought I was going to die. And my mother and stepfather were kneeled by my bed and cried and prayed over me. They didn't know how to help me. They didn't know how to call the ambulance. They didn't know what to do. Now, this was going to be just the beginning of a long history of panic attacks. I had panic attacks for years, and they varied in intensity. I was in university doing my lectures, and in the lecture theater, the minute that the lecture lights went down, I could feel it coming, and I had to run out the lecture theater and in a corner hold on a pillow and wait for the attack to go. I went and saw my GP, and whilst I never obtained an official diagnosis, he prescribed me medication for depression because I realized that I won't be able to cope with the stress I was having unless I was medicating. And this medication was a double-edged sword. In one way, it was helping me cope, but on the other hand, it made me incredibly tired. And I spent my weekends sleeping in bed so I can cope with the week. Now, I'm going to come back to the incident at work. By the time I started in this role, I was somehow recovered. I didn't have panic attacks, and if they came, rarely, I knew how to master them. I started accessing material on panic attacks. Back then in 2003, there wasn't much literature, and mental health issues were not talked openly. It was something that you wouldn't easily admit to, and being new to the country, I didn't know where to get help and access help. After this incident, I was blamed for the project failure. The project was closed off. I was complained against by the project manager, and I was put under the tight supervision of my team leader. This was around mid-2019. And from then on, the most horrible period of my employment history started. I was systematically bullied up to leaving on maternity leave in 2020, and also upon from my maternity leave in December 2022. The behavior consisted of having every aspect of my work scrutinized, every email criticized, every action and advice questioned. When I asked questions or saw directions, I was made to feel stupid for asking those questions in the same place. And I entered a very dark space. The panic attack came back, the insomnia returned, I developed incredible stomach pains. I started withdrawing from the team, and I felt more and more incompetent. I lost trust in my analytical capability and in my self-worth, and every day I would leave for work worrying that I'm going to make a mistake and that they're going to uncover it and they're going to pick on me. Now, I started experiencing feelings of low self-esteem, and until then, I haven't experienced them. I didn't know what they were, and they took me by surprise, and I didn't know how to manage them. But what I didn't know was these feelings was deeply rooted in my childhood negative experiences. However, these feelings were dormant, and they were about to be resurrected by the events that unfolded. And this is how they manifested. Feelings of intense fear. Fear of all types. The fear of being rejected, the fear of being wrong, the fear of failure, fear of unknown, fear of being hurt by people. They were feeling so strong that no amount of prayer could help me better. Only temporarily prayer would help me and would alleviate some of the anxiety that I felt. I thought that if I prayed hard enough and hanged on to the Word of God, it will eventually go away. I blame myself for not trusting God enough. I was reminded daily by the fact that God's children do not fear, and a failure of exercising trust in God would be reflective of my level of spirituality. And this had to do with the way that God was presented to me as a child. I felt, and I was told by others, that I wasn't faithful enough. Now, I'm going to cut through this, and I'm going to tell you later in the afternoon where these feelings of fear originated, where they actually started, because they had a cause. They happened before I wasn't born. And now I was just reaping the effect. Now, at this time I was praying to God, and let me tell you something. I battled depression and anxiety for a period of 15 years after this, which started in 2004. And all this time I was praying and I was asking God to heal me. And I couldn't understand, and I was dwelling all the time on the passage in Matthew that says, put all your fears and anxiety on me. Do not worry about your life. Don't worry about tomorrow. And for a period of 15 years, I dwelled on this passage and I thought I understood it. And I would hang on it at night and I would wake up in the morning feeling more fearful than before. And it was around this time that my mom came across the sermon of Horst Müller. Now, Horst Müller is a Romanian-German cardiologist. who opened a practice in Winham, Germany, to help people through the efforts of natural medicine. And in his studies, Mueller found a connection between our present sufferings and disease of a person and their personal relationship to thoughts. So what Mueller is saying, some of our physical problems are in fact generated by the way we think. So I started listening to this doctor, and I listened to him every night, and I said, I am going to listen to his seminars until I get it. And every day I hanged on to this, and I listened and I listened and I prayed. Now, what Mueller was saying very much validated my doctor's opinion about me. When I went to get my medication from the GP, he said to me, you know what, Andreea, the problem is the way you think. The problem is in your head. And I thought, hold on a second, I've just been going through all this trauma. I've been through migration, I've been through family violence as a child, I've been through adverse school experiences, now I'm going through this bullying, and you're telling me that this is my problem, that this problem is up in my head, that I'm imagining all of this. So I wasn't prepared to accept what my GP told me, but what he told me was really important. And this man now was validating what my GP was telling me. Also around this time, I started seeing a psychologist, because this is how God inspired me to act. And she was a Christian psychologist. And she worked with me for a period of 8 months and taught me techniques how to cope with the fear whilst reaffirming my faith in God. I became pregnant with my first child, and I got worried because I was medicating for depression, and I thought, is the medication going to affect the child and the development of the child? So I went and consulted a psychiatrist to ensure that the treatment I was doing was not going to affect the developing baby. And I found one at short notice, and he did an assessment of me. He only did one assessment. And he said to me, I believe that you have severe anxiety, and I believe that you would overcome this if you would stop worrying about things. I don't think that what you have is serious, but it's just the way you think. Now at that moment, believe it or not, I walked out of his office and I never touched a pill again. You know why? I needed a professional to tell me that I am okay. I needed a human being, a trusted professional in the field, to tell me that I am okay. And this goes on to demonstrate the power of thinking, what thinking does. I wasn't 100% here. I was healed from depression, but the anxiety was still there, was still lingering. And I'm going to cut through this really quickly and tell you that eventually I was moved out of that team after 6 years, and I went on to better things. My bullies had a lot of lessons to learn, and I'm going to take you through these lessons in the afternoon. But surrendering to God, in that learning to accept that fear and not be fearful of that fear that came to me every day, surrendering that bully to God, and going to sleep, at night, after I quit my medication, I went to sleep and I said, whatever happens tomorrow, if tomorrow I lose my job, if I make a mistake, so what? If I lose my job, so what? If I can't pay my mortgage, so what? It doesn't actually matter, because God is in control. And that was the first time that I managed to exercise trust in Him. Now, in closing, I want us to return quickly to the passage in Exodus, because the key is in this passage. Later tonight I'm going to tell you more about what the secret of healing is. But for now, I want to take you through this passage because it unlocks some truth. Now, when Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they were in great fear. And they cried to the Lord, and they said to Moses, why did you bring us here and didn't let us die in Egypt? The bondage, the depression of Egypt was better than us being confronted with this, a sea of water. And Moses said to the people, stand firm and see that the salvation of God is near. And the Lord said to Moses and asked him, why are these people crying out to me? Why aren't these people moving? They had time to pray for 130 years for their healing. They've been through plagues. They've been through Passover. They've seen you turning the rod into serpents, and they've seen the blood pouring in Egypt. And here you are, about to cross and be freed from bondage and freer, and you are putting your heels in the ground and you don't want to move forward, and you start crying in fear. You see, I was pushed between the Egyptian army and the Red Sea. However, instead of me crossing on the other side 15 years ago when my depression started, I panicked, I cried, I kicked and I screamed. In these 4 years that I was bullying, I think I applied for 7 or 8 jobs, and I attempted, I don't know how many internals and external transfers to get out. I once went to my boss, and I was pregnant, 3 months pregnant, and I went to my boss in his office and I started crying, and I said, I can't take this anymore, you have to move me. And technically, under the Mental Health Act, he had to move me, but he refused, and he said, sure, I'm gonna move you. And then later he didn't do anything, and he said to me, you have to stay in there and resolve it. And what he did was wrong, but God allowed it because I had to stay in there and resolve it. Although I didn't have the means and I had to research for the means to resolve it, I had to confront that bully. This was the same bully that was hunting me, that was persecuting me from the day that I was born. And unless I will be able to confront the bully and hand it over to God, I wasn't ready to move. And God kept me in that job. Now, please remember, God has taken me from job to job to job to job. And I had to go where God is taking me. And now He doesn't want to get me out. Now He's locking me. I worked for this agency for 7 years, and He's locked me in there. And He didn't let me out of that team. So God must have wanted something from me. And if you're wondering why God is not healing you or resolving the problem in your life, perhaps you should wonder, what is it, God? What are you trying to teach me? Help me learn it quickly so I can get out of this situation. Now, I was listening to a sermon by De Blair Snell, and after my pastors in my church, De Blair Snell is my favorite pastor. And I received a great lot of comfort through his sermons. And he's saying that God allows irritants, challenges, and adversities in our life so He can reveal our true colors. In my case, I firmly believe that I had to go through this to surrender the fear in my life, because unless I did it now, when the time of persecution comes, and don't be fooled, a time of persecution will come, and I don't want to scare you. But unless you are able to overcome the challenges that are in your life now and develop resilience, and harden your mind and anchor it in Jesus Christ, we will not be able to stand up when those trials are coming, because that's going to be the patience, endurance of the saints, and it is a battle at the level of the mind. Now, do you think that God was rebuking the Israelites when He told them, sorry, let me go back to the passage if it's there. It's not there. But when God was telling Moses, why are people crying and they're not moving on, do you think God was rebuking them for praying? Because in an essence they were praying. They were screaming to heal for faith, out of fear. He wasn't rebuking them because they were praying. He wasn't rebuking them for their prayerfulness. He was rebuking them for their lack of awareness. It wasn't a time to pray. It was a time to move. and they didn't recognize it. They had to cross, all they had to do is to put their foot in the Red Sea, cross on the other side, and they would be free of bondage. And I often wondered why it was so difficult for me to see it during these 15 years. Now, just something really quickly, which is really important, and then I'm going to wrap up. When God led the Israelites through the pathway that He led them through, He did because it was the easiest pathway. He didn't let them through Philistine territory. There was another option. But the spirit of prophecy says that the Israelites had little knowledge of God and little faith in Him, because whilst in Egypt, they somehow gotten along with the customs of the place and forgotten about God. They were unarmed and unaccustomed to war. And listen closely to this one. The spirit of prophecy says they were depressed by long bondage. So in leading them by the Red Sea, the Lord revealed Himself to be a God of compassion. Should they have seen war and encountered the Philistines, they would have gotten disheartened and run back. But the Israelites misunderstood this pathway. And as the force drew near, the hosts of Egypt were in full pursuit. Terror filled the hearts of the Israelites, and some cried out to the Lord by a great number. But Moses, having been brought to this position after 40 years of humbling experiences pastoring sheep, the spirit of prophecy says that Moses felt no fear of the consequences. And he told people, "Fear not, stand firm and see the salvation that the Lord will work for you today." Moses would have not been able to handle a sea of people who are angry, who are going to resort to whatever weapons they had available, who are about to start a revolution, who are about to kill him and his family. But he felt no fear, because 80 years he trained in the most difficult circumstances. Now let me close with this. The great controversy says that God has permitted trials to come upon His people, to prepare them for the accomplishment of His gracious purpose toward them. The church has been brought low so that she may be exalted. And God was about to display His power in her behalf, to give to the world another evidence that He will not forsake those who trust in Him. He had overruled events to cause the wrath of Satan and the plots of evil men to advance His glory and to bring His people to a place of security. Persecution and exile were opening the way to freedom. My dear friends, God wants to heal us emotionally, but we are with our minds still in Egypt. We are on the Egypt side of the Red Sea. Sometimes we go through hardship and adversity and we think that it's unfair. We feel sorry for ourselves. We see ourselves as victims. We don't want to move on because we think that someone has done something wrong to us. We blame our misachievements for events that have happened in childhood that we think that have incapacitated us. We are crying and we are looking for attention. And I know that I sound harsh, but I'm seeing this in my own family members who have been through abuse, and now they blame that abuse and they don't work and don't do anything with their lives because they think that they've been victims of circumstances. And this is not the type of thinking that God wants us to have. God wants warriors. God takes broken people and assigns them to big jobs. And I challenge you to refrain your thoughts. And we're going to talk about reframing this afternoon and what it means. I challenge you to look at the depression in your life as a precursor for the great plan that Jesus has for you. If God will heal you, that is because He wants you to share your testimony. And I challenge you to think about your trials as something, as attention that you receive from God. The more you are trialed, the more you are worth. The greatest your trials are, the more God has to go in and get you out, and the more attention you get from God. The more He trains you, the more you value. Now, it was only after these experiences and the experiences that I will share with you this afternoon, that I started to walk on water. But to walk on water, you have to step in the sea. And this is only done by faith and faith alone. Eyes on Jesus at all time. And I can promise you through my personal testimony that He will be there for you. So fear not. Amen.